Hi, I'm Julie Cooper, a mystery and thriller writer and half of the duo bringing you Kendall and Cooper Talk Mysteries, a regular podcast series. Before we begin, I'd like to give credit to my brother Chris Squires for our great intro and exit music, his original composition and performance of The Man in the Panama Hat. We have a special guest author with us today, and I'm anxious to introduce him. But first, Wendy's going to talk a little bit about our theme for this podcast.
Hello, everyone. Wendy Kendall here, cozy writer and mystery lover. Today we're talking about layering. This topic is not inspired by a recommended wardrobe during the winter weather, but instead it's inspired by our guest author, who is a maestro of layering. If you think of a story like a great painting, they both reveal their core message through many enhancing layers. It was my good fortune to watch Pacific Northwest talented artist David Marty create one of his incredible landscape paintings. And, to oversimplify, he explained that he starts with a core scene and then keeps going back to it to layer in more interest, texture, and technique to make a more complete portrait of the scene. Just so, in a great book, there's cohesive layering. For instance, peel away the top layer and you get background information. Peel another layer, you get tension and atmosphere. Peel some more and you get deep emotion, empathy, and immediacy. Another layer will reveal characterization, and more layers reveal pace, action, and so on. The ability of the writer to layer these aspects, one on top of the other, is what gives stories and novels not only depth, but appeal. It's the layers that enhance the naked plot and enable the reader to look beyond. They're able to read between the lines and become involved with a multi-dimensional, invigorated story, which is so much more interesting.
I'd have to agree. And our special guest today is Robert Dugoni, mystery writer and retired or former attorney from Seattle, Washington. He burst onto the New York Times bestseller list in 2006 and wrote more successful books in the David Sloan legal mystery series, stories set in the Seattle area. The first book in that series was Damage Control, successfully followed by Wrongful Death, among many others. Bob earned stellar reviews and awards along the way, but like many accomplished novelists, he clearly didn't get the attention he should have. In 2014, Bob moved to the Amazon publishing imprint called Thomas and Mercer. Things began to change in a big way when he wrote My Sister's Grave, a more recent series featuring Seattle detective Tracy Crosswhite. That book was #1 bestseller for all books on Amazon for 3 consecutive months and ranked on the Wall Street Journal's bestseller list. And The Trapped Girl became a #1 Wall Street Journal book its first week out of the gate. So today we'll talk about writing mysteries, about the Byzantine system of traditional publishing, and what's next for Bob. Welcome, Bob Dugoni.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Bob,
I know Wendy has some questions for you.
Well, first off, I want to congratulate you on an Edgar Award nomination. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited about it. I recognize that that's an award that is I'm nominated for by my peers. Some people I consider some of the best writers in the world. So, to be nominated is certainly a wonderful feeling, and I'm hopeful that come April, I think it's the 27th, we can change that to that I actually won an Edgar Award, which would be fantastic.
Absolutely. You're nominated for Best Paperback Original for the 7th Canon. Tell us a little bit, how were you told about your nomination, and how did you feel about that when you heard it?
Well, I'll tell you, initially I was really surprised, and it's basically because, the 7th Canon I wrote about 10 years ago, and it's one of those proverbial books that got put in a drawer. And as my career sort of took off here with Thomas and Mercer and My Sister's Grave and the books that followed, they were back in New York visiting my agent, and they were talking about, how prolific I was getting these books out so quickly. And my agent said, well, he's got a book in his desk drawer that we all really liked, but we went with another publishing house back in the day, and that book got put in a drawer. So they said, we'd love to read it. I nearly, killed my agent because I don't think I'd looked at that book in 10 years, but they were kind enough to give me some time. I went through the book and actually felt it was, in better shape than I thought it was. We put it out, and it's done extremely well. And, and the award was kind of just really the icing on the cake. I've had a lot of people, a lot of readers email me and tell me that was the book that they liked the most. It probably has more action than a lot of books that I've written, and it has, more in the protagonist is more in peril. But it was really wonderful. I got a call from my editor at Thomas and Mercer, Gracie Doyle, and she gave me the good news, and it was really terrific, to get that, to be one of 5 nominated. I know I've been on that nominating process. I know there are, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books that are considered. So it made me feel really good.
I can't even imagine. Well, who did you share the news with first when you first got that call?
Well, my wife.
Great.
Yeah, she's been through this process as much as I have. I think writers with spouses know what I'm talking about. There's the good days where we're up and just, can't wait to talk to people, and there are the bad days where we just want to be left alone. And she's been through this process with me on many different levels, and so she gets the first call on all good news.
What a great thing to share with her. Well, can you entice our listeners a little with just a taste of the plot of the 7th Canon? It's a thriller that takes place in San Francisco, which is your home before Seattle was.
Yeah. No, I wrote it back in the day when I think it was in the 1990s. And I wrote it back in the day when I was still practicing law. And so, a lot of everything in there is accurate in terms of where the courthouse was located, where the jail was located. It's since been moved. But, basically the story is of a young lawyer. He's 3 years out. He's working for his uncle, who represents the Archdiocese of San Francisco, as well as an very eclectic group of people in San Francisco, mostly, plaintiffs type law. And he's working for him. He has, he has his own past. He has his own background. His uncle bailed him out of a bad situation when he was a young man, and he's kind of paying his debt back. Not that his uncle requires it, but he just feels obligated. And so he's in his office, and he just gets back from a trial, and his uncle doesn't come right in, and he can't figure out what's going on. And it turns out his uncle has had a heart attack. He gets put in the hospital. They get a subsequent call from the Archbishop of San Francisco, who says, they got a priest that's been accused of killing a young boy that is in his care at a homeless shelter, a shelter in San Francisco for young teenage prostitutes. And so Peter Donnelly, the protagonist, is asked to represent this priest. And it's really not clear whether he's innocent or guilty. And that's a very difficult thing for Peter to have to deal with. And so he sets out to try to figure out what happened and why.
I think our listeners are already heading out the door to get that book. That sounds really awesome. Beyond enjoying your books, I just have a great respect and enthusiasm for the dynamic writing style that you have, Bob. And, well, I have to admit to you, with a nod to your proud Italian ancestry, I have named your writing style for myself.
Okay.
I've named it Dugonian Multistrati.
I have no idea what it means, but it sounds good.
I think it's good. It's definitely enjoyable. The Dugonian part, different than Draconian, which would be harsh or severe or extreme. Your Dugonian writing gently persuades a reader's imagination without directing it or demanding. And multistrati is multiple layers woven together. So I've got to ask you, Bob, what are the keys to your layering style?
Well, when you were talking during the introduction and you were talking about the painting, ironically, that is an image that I use when I teach, because I think it's very true for those of us writers who don't outline, who are more seat of the pants writers. There's another name for it now that's escaping me. That sounds a lot more pleasant than seat of the pants. Organic. They call us organic. Yeah, that's a very appropriate analogy, because when I teach, I talk about how it's like starting with a blank canvas. So when you're a painter and you have an idea of what you want to paint, and I don't know painting, and so I'm sure that there are some people that take a pencil and sort of put on there what they want to paint, and then they begin to paint. But I'm talking about those people that they take a blank canvas. Maybe an impressionist painter would be the best way to put it, and the first time through you just put a wide swath of color, and then you go back, and the next time you go back through it, you begin to put in a little bit more detail, a little bit of colors here, there, and everywhere. And then you go through again and again and again. And by the time you get to the 20th time that you're going through, you're putting these little flecks, on the painting. And when you step back, those flecks represent a hat or a leaf or, something minute like that. But it really completes the picture. And there was a Monet in St. Petersburg years ago when I was back there. And you could do that. You could walk up to the painting, stand really, really close to it, and you could stare at one little black dot. And then when you stepped back, you began to see more and more of the image come into focus, and you realized you were looking at the hat of a man in the middle of this huge gathering in Paris. And it was really fascinating for me, and that's what sort of provoked the image. I tell writing students that that's sort of what you're doing is that first draft. When you go through and you're writing, you don't edit yourself. You don't sit there and question what you're doing. You just do it. You let your unconscious go forward, and you just get everything out and you put it all out on your word processor. And then you go back through it and you become a little bit more discerning, and you take out a few things and you add a few things, and you add a little bit more color to a character. You add a little bit more dialogue. You add a little bit more setting. You go through it the next time, and you begin to see the story unfold. And so as you go back to the beginning, you know what you're keeping, you know what you're not keeping, and you know what you're adding, and you know what you're taking out. And literally that's how I write. And by the time I get to that 20th draft, 10th draft, whatever it is, I'm going through the manuscript and I'm putting little flicks on it, a little bit more color here, a little bit more dialogue here, a little less setting here, and I begin to just take it all out so that story becomes more and more focused for the reader. I heard somebody say one time that you never edit yourself on your first draft, because you never know why your subconscious is putting something into a book. And I've had that happen to me, on several occasions where I get to the end and I go, oh, wow, that's why I did that. So it's really a wonderful process, and it's a wonderful process of sort of investigation and uncovering. And I think you have to learn how to trust yourself, trust your instincts, and go through and go through the process. And like a painter, and until you finally at the very end you have this canvas that has just everything you wanted in it.
Oh, that's awesome. In one of your workshops I attended, you taught that dialogue is action and action is dialogue. And if you want to get your story moving, get your characters talking to each other. Can you tell us more about the importance of dialogue and what the keys are to writing dialogue that sounds realistic?
Yeah, I stole that line from my buddy John Huff Jr. back in Falmouth, Massachusetts. John is a literary writer, and John told me that many years ago when he was reading one of my manuscripts. He said dialogue is action and action is dialogue, and it's a very simple concept, just in general, and that is you get your characters talking, and they begin to act, right? Even if they're in a cafe and they're talking, there's going to be you see me now, there's going to be hand movements. There's going to be nods of the head. There's going to be eye diversions. There's going to be, looking away. There's going to be, fixing their hair. There's going to be movement involved in that action. But more importantly, when you begin to have dialogue, you begin to have white space on your page. And I think there's nothing more daunting for a reader than to turn page after page after page and see nothing but black lines. Dialogue gives you that blank space, and it gets your characters involved with each other. One of the things that I teach, in fact, I'm working on a manuscript right now for a student, is dialogue is a way of characterizing. There are a number of different ways to characterize how someone looks, how someone dresses, how they speak, right, and how they view the world, and that how they speak, what they say, can be really revealing about who the character is and about what emotion that character is going through at that moment. I think too often one of the mistakes we make as writers is we want to tell the reader that the character is upset. Well, why can't the character just say a line that makes it very clear that the character is upset? We go out in public and we meet people and we talk to them, and a lot of times it's not how they look that has the biggest impression on us. It's what they say and how they say it that really resonates with us. So I'm a big believer in dialogue, no matter what genre you're writing, because I think it reveals so much about character, and people that can do it are really talented. John, my friend, John Huff Jr., he has a book out with Writer's Digest on dialogue, and he's a pro at it. He's excellent at it. And one of the techniques that he teaches is how we talk is not how we write dialogue. We will talk our way into a conversation and we'll talk our way out of a conversation. You don't have that luxury when you're writing a novel. You have to hit the dialogue, at the moment when the characters are in action, they're moving, or whatever the purpose of that particular scene is. And it's like giving the highlights. You give the reader the highlights of what that scene is. And and then the other thing is, there's little things. We stutter when we talk. We repeat ourselves. We say we say we say all these different things. Reader doesn't want to read that, and it doesn't make the writing any more real by putting that in there. In fact, it becomes annoying and it becomes frustrating for a reader. You want to give the reader the words. What words is your character saying? And the other thing is to be oblique. We don't talk necessarily, in dialogue. We don't answer every question that's given to us. We don't ask the appropriate next question. We're oblique, and so there's a lot of different ways that you can play with dialogue that helps to reveal characterization. And that was something, like I said, that I learned from John. And I just, I think it's really very important, because it really gets the story moving at a fast pace when you get two people talking.
It sure does in your books.
Yeah, it's something that I've had to work on. I really have. I'm in the middle of a book right now called Blind Your Ponies. And it's terrific because it's dialogue. There's so much dialogue in the book, and it's in a small Montana town, and so you have scenes in diners where you have multiple people talking, and yet who the person is by the way they use their voice. The writer doesn't have to always identify it, because they are able to identify the speaker through the language that they use. And it's a really important tool, I think, that a lot of times gets ignored in writing.
It takes a lot of practice, I'm thinking.
It does. It does. And, I was a lawyer in my past life, and I took a lot of depositions, and I think that helped. Asking people questions and hearing their answers and how they answered and when they were trying to avoid answering and when they were being deceptive and when they were rambling and when they were nervous. I think that helped me quite a bit in writing dialogue. It's something that I really enjoy. You can be funny in dialogue, you can be witty, you can be wise, and the nice part about that is you don't have to do it on the spot. You can think about a line for 10 minutes, and then when you think of that line and it just the perfect line, and people laugh when they read it and they say, "Oh my God, that line was so funny." You don't have to tell them it took you 10 or 15 minutes to come up with that line. So, it's a real skill.
I wanted to talk a minute about My Sister's Grave, that great book. The sibling relationship between Tracy Crosswhite and her sister Sarah is so touching. And it's told through Tracy's vivid flashbacks, along with the comments and reflections of other characters. You grew up in a big family of 10. Did you draw from your own sister's relationships in writing these characters, or did that inspiration come from elsewhere? And how do people that writers meet in life show up in authors' works?
Yeah, I stole that. I stole my sister's relationships, carte blanche. I mean, I can remember they had the weirdest. Well, first of all, I have 5 brothers. If my brother called me up right now, he'd say, "Hey, loser, what are you doing?" and that's just kind of the way brothers are, right? And
Right.
Yeah.
my sisters though have a, it's how you doing? What's going on? What's going on with Katie? When's her wedding? What's going on? There's a much deeper, I think, relationship there, and so that's why I wanted it to be 2 sisters, because at least from my perspective, from my own family. But then the other thing is they had sort of these weird rules, like you could borrow somebody else's article of clothing, but only after they wore it once. I mean, if they hadn't worn it, then it was hands off, and you were you were in big trouble if you wore their blouse or whatever. But if they wore it once, you were fine. I can remember one time one of my sisters finding my other sister's diary, and just reading it as like the house was on fire, just reading it as quickly as possible, because she knew she was going to get in trouble. And so there was all these little things. I have a daughter, and one of the things she liked to do as a little kid was she used to like to stand around a corner, and when you'd come by, she'd jump out and scare you. And I mean, it just drove us all crazy, but she was great at it. And so I added that into the book. So there was a lot of things that I took from my sisters and from other people that I introduced into the book to try to create this relationship between Tracy and her sister when they were 2 young girls. I said this before, and I'll say it again. One of the things that I made a decision on very early when I was writing that book was I was not going to try to write from the perspective of a woman. I was not going to try to write from the perspective of a young girl. I thought that would be just, I thought that would be a recipe for disaster, because, I don't think that a man can get it just right. And I don't think that a woman can necessarily get it just right when trying to write a male character. But I think what we can get right, and I think what resonates with people, is when we write from the perspective of a human being, when we write from the perspective of somebody that's been grievously injured in their past, when we write from the perspective of somebody that, has this joyous moment. We can all relate to that. We can all identify to that. And it becomes a universal emotion that we can all pull on when we're writing our characters. But the little tiny details, those are things that I really had to research so that it appeared authentic.
Do you ever just meet somebody and think, oh my gosh, I got to put this person in a book?
More often than you probably would ever imagine.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, that's our job. I tell my students, that's our job. Our job is to be observant. Our job is to think. Our job is to listen to people and how they say things and the way they say things and how they dress and what they're dressed like and why they dress like and why in God's name would anyone wear that? There's all those things that you can take and you can pull and you can put into a book. And I will tell you, I have put people in books that never ever see themselves and never will. But there are people that I don't put in books and then they see themselves in some character that's in there because the actions are universal. So yeah, I think you have to do that as a writer. I think that's where you get your tapestry from. Is I tell my students, I'll be in a class of 20 students and I'll say, look around, look at each other. No one here is dressed exactly the same. And I'll bet you any money that every single one of you got up and you had a reason for wearing what you were wearing. And it was either because you wanted to be comfortable or you wanted to look professional or you wanted to, at least look good or you liked the appearance of this. I said, I doubt any of you ever got up and you put on all your clothes and you said, oh, wow, this looks really shitty. This is perfect. So why did you wear what you were wearing? What does it say about who you are? Have you ever met a man who has rings on all his fingers and then gold bracelets? I mean, where does that come from? You meet somebody that's wearing a really expensive watch and a pinky ring. Where does all this stuff come from? What it is it's a marker, and it's no different than the house that somebody lives in or the car that they drive. It says something about who that person is. And I think it's just really important to be observant in that way.
Well, I know writing's a lot of hard work, but you do make it sound a lot of fun too, Bob.
It's the best job in the world. I feel blessed every day to get up and have the opportunity to do it. It's a wonderful world, when you get up and you're able to create characters, you're able to create storylines, you're able to really pull things together. And there's nothing better than when you get to that end of that draft on your computer, not even when the book is published, but when you're finished with it and you type the end. It's almost like a birth and a wedding and a funeral all in one. Because you've created all these people, you've given them life, and at that moment you're saying, I'm done with you now. I'm finished with you now, and I'm gonna move on. It's really remarkable, and when I read a good book, when I read a Stephen King book, which some of his books I just love, that's the feeling I get when I get done with it. I feel like I'm burying friends. That I've had this great, met some great people and I had this great experience with them. And now it's time to go home. And I know I'm not going to see them again.
Wow. Well, some books that are written with flashbacks, like you used in My Sister's Grave, sometimes I find those tiresome and I just want to skim through the flashback and get back to what's happening now. But in My Sister's Grave, I found myself as excited to read the flashbacks as I was to read the current action. What is it that makes ongoing flashbacks successful?
Well, I know what you're saying because I go through the same thing. I think there's a couple of things that you have to keep in mind. And the most important thing is that a flashback is a scene. It is a scene. It's not a recollection. It's not a memory. I think one of the biggest mistakes new writers make is when they make their flashback a recollection and then the story becomes stagnant. Nothing happens. A flashback should be a scene, meaning we should have characters, we should have movement, we should have dialogue. All the things that you're going to put into a regular scene, conflict, goals, desires, that they need to be in that flashback because, it's a scene in a story. And I think then the second thing is it needs to be relevant to the story that you're telling. So if you're telling a story, right, you can't just have your character nod off and have a flashback because it's convenient. They should have a flashback the way that human beings really have flashbacks, which is something triggers it. Something at that moment right then and there triggers it. And that's what we do all the time. I don't, when your listeners go home and visit, if they've moved away and they're, starting their own families, having their own families, when they go home and visit, there's a memory that's triggered. There's something, boom. When I go home now to visit my mom, I think of my dad who passed away 8 years ago. But that seeing that childhood home, I expect to see my dad sitting in the chair in the family room watching TV. Because that's my recollection, that's my memory. And so I think it's important that your flashback relate to the moment in time that you're telling in the present for your main character, that it has relevance to your main character. And if it has relevance to your main character, if it's going to reveal something about your main character, about who they are, about where they came from, then it's going to be relevant to the reader. And I think that's the key, is making the flashback relevant to the story that you're telling.
Got it. Well, there's often a thin line between real life and fiction, and your books are great examples of that. I want to switch now to your fictional thriller, Bodily Harm, which I recommended to listeners in a previous podcast episode. Issues concerning toys and child safety are at the heart and are real. So how do you find and decide on the core message that you want in your books? And how do you decide what you want your readers thinking about?
Yeah, I think I start with, what do I want my characters thinking about? Why is something going to be important to my characters, and what impact is it going to have on my characters? If I can do that, and I do the rest of my job well enough, such that the reader becomes a part of the story, then the reader will care about it. I'll give you an example of a real life incident. In The Trap Girl, I was really struggling with that book because I started with the wrong premise. I started with a premise that I wanted there to be a crime that took place up on Mount Rainier. Out here in Seattle, Mount Rainier is, the big mountain that everyone goes and climbs, and it really dominates over the landscape around here. And so I did a lot of research into Mount Rainier and people who had climbed Mount Rainier and the paths to climb Mount Rainier. And every time I did it, the person that I interviewed would say, why is your detective on Mount Rainier? And I never could come up with an answer for that. And when I couldn't come up with an answer for it, I knew it couldn't be the subject of the book. It couldn't be the main focus of the book. And I was out with 2 homicide detectives who have really helped me a tremendous amount in all my novels. And we were sitting having dinner, and we were just talking and chatting, and what are you going to do next? And one of the detectives said to me, you know what you ought to do? You ought to put a body in a crab pot and have somebody find it. And I looked at him and I said, really? And he goes, we had a case like that, where the guy killed his girlfriend, stuffed her in a crab pot, dropped the crab pot, and the only reason they found her was because of his conscience. They knew he did it. They didn't know how he did it, and they got this guy to say to them, yeah, I did it, and this is where I dumped her. And they were able to find it. And so, my eyes lit up. As a mystery writer, as a thriller writer, it was like, wow, that's really cool. I hadn't thought of that. And so, that was a real life scenario that I was able to take and work into the story. And it sort of then began to bring all the little parts, I talked about that painting, began to bring them all together like a puzzle. And I was able to, come up with a real solid storyline for that book.
Wow. Well, at a point in your life, you made the conscious decision to follow your dream to be a writer. And that's something that's not easy to do. Many people give up on their dreams, whatever their dreams may be, for a variety of reasons. Can you tell us what it's meant to you to live your dream? And do you have any advice to other dreamers?
Yeah, it's meant everything. I try to figure out a way to say this without sounding snotty. I've been in this career, and I've had no success. I've had some success, and I've had tremendous success. And the one thing I can tell you is that my life, the core principles of my life, have not changed at all. They've always been the same. And my focus has always been on my wife, my kids, my family. You know, I always wanted my wife, my kids to be happy. I wanted my wife and kids to have everything they needed. And I wanted to be able to share my life experiences with them. You know, I take my kids, we've been to Paris, and that's, you know, not a wealthy thing to do. We did it very inexpensively, but I take them on trips with me. I take them on vacations with me because it's important for me to be able to, for them to be able to experience those kinds of things. And I think that's what dreams are. I think dreams are the manifestation of what really is important to you. And what's really important to me has never been the money. It's always been the ability to write, the ability to tell stories. So, I mean, you know, I get up every day and I can't wait to go to work. I can't wait to write. I can't wait, you know, to pull up my computer and continue researching or whatever it is that goes into a story. I feel extremely blessed that I'm able to do it. But I think people get trapped when they start to have expectations of what their dream is. And I think if you're expecting that your book is going to be published, if you're expecting that it's going to hit the New York Times bestseller list, if you're expecting that they're going to make a movie out of it and pay you $1 million and have Julia Roberts meet you on the set, you know, all those things, you're setting yourself up for failure, and you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and you're setting yourself up for bitterness. And I think, you know, the most important thing about dreams is to remember that, you know, your dream to be a writer is getting up and actually telling and writing the story. Everything beyond that, you know, is superfluous. If you get to do what you love to do.
That's beautiful. Julie, do you have some questions for Bob?
I certainly do. Bob, I think your book titles, such as Damage Control, Her Final Breath, and others, always have such impact, kind of resonance, the extra edge that makes me pull them off the shelf and want to read them. And so I'm wondering, how do you select the titles, or is that solely the domain of your publisher?
Well, I'm laughing because it's really the only title that I have ever had that stayed on a book was The Cyanide Canary, which was the nonfiction book that I wrote with Joe Hildorfer.
Right.
Every other title, they've changed. And it's gotten almost comical because when I turned in the first David Sloan novel is called The Jurymaster. And when I turned it in, I called it Wrongful Death. And they said, no, that's a terrible title. We want to call it The Jurymaster. So, okay, great. I switched publishing houses. I went over to Simon & Schuster. I wrote a book. I forget what I was calling it. It was, you know, False something. And they came back and they said, we have a great title. We have a terrific title. You're going to love this title. I said, okay, give it to me. And they said, it's Wrongful Death.
Oh, no.
So
okay.
I take credit for that one, too. But, you know, otherwise, the last book I just turned in, the fifth Tracy Crosswhite book, is going to be called Close to Home. I just called it JAG, J-A-G, because there's a judge advocate general, a JAG lawyer, in the book. And I just called it JAG because, you know, I knew that I was probably not going to be able to find a title on it, as well as the people at Thomas and Mercer. I mean, you know, there are people, that's their job. Their job is to design covers. Their job is to come up with titles, you know, that are catchy, that are, you know, like, if you'll notice, all my Tracy Crosswhite books are 3 words, right? My Sister's Grave, Her Final Breath, In the Clearing, The Trapped Girl. And so that's part of the series. They wanted to really promote that, right? And so, you know, there are things that go into titles that writers a lot of times don't even think about. And so I don't get wed to a title because I just know I'm going to end up being disappointed. I let the people who, you know, do that for a living, I let them handle it.
Great. Well, I've always heard that it's sort of a battle and that some authors really get invested in titles and then are told, no, that won't work, or duplicate something else. So
It does happen.
thanks for sharing the insights on that. Bob, I just read your interview in the Big Thrill, the International Thriller Writers newsletter, and you spoke about the importance of setting. And you even toured the readers around Seattle a little bit, including talking about Mount Rainier. You went on to say that you've always tried to make the settings as realistic as possible. And I think that's a very valuable way to make the reader feel at home so that they fall into the world of the story, the fictive dream, so to speak, and keep turning pages. Can you tell us a little bit about the research involved in getting it right regarding settings, even though you've lived in the Seattle area since '99?
Yeah, I really admire science fiction writers because they have to create their own settings, and that's just a really difficult thing to do. I always think that the people that do that must have incredible imaginations, or what they do is they take a setting that they are familiar with and then they just change it slightly. But in any event, it's a real talent. I think the first thing that we need to remember is that the setting is a character in your book. Where your book is taking place is often going to be dictated by the setting. If you have a book that takes place in New York City and you have somebody driving through rush hour traffic, they're not getting anywhere very fast. Right? Everybody takes the subway. Everyone jumps on the subway to get where they need to go. And you need to be familiar with that if you're going to have a chase scene or something like that in New York City. That's a lot different than if you put somebody in a rural mountain town out here in the Pacific Northwest, right? And that's my sister's grave. Well, then you start thinking, well, what if there's a snowstorm in a mountain town in the Pacific Northwest? What is that going to do? How is that going to impact the characters in your novel? And how is that going to change what they do and how they behave and all those kinds of things? I tell people, if you want to see the real colors of a person, put them in New York City in the middle of a heat wave, and there's a garbage strike going on. I mean, people get frustrated, they get angry, they're easy to anger. There's all those things. So one of the first things I try to do is I try to create a story, and I try to have the setting be a character in my book, and that's why you'll see the setting changes often. If I want a book to be a lonely book, a book of wanting, a book, I'll have it raining. I'll have it raining all the time. Somebody once told me that TV show, The Killing, it's supposed to be up here in Seattle. They actually filmed it in Vancouver, British Columbia. But it was raining in every single episode because that's people's perspective of Seattle, is it rains all the time here. And if I could show you out my window, it's raining today. Well, what does that do to people? What impact does it have on people? And so I start with the broad canvas of the setting. Where am I? What's the time of season? And then I begin to pull it down into the places you go, coffee shops, all those different places. And, who are the people? The people in Seattle dress differently than the people in New York City and in Los Angeles. I mean, it's a different place, and that impacts your character. So I always tell people, don't focus so much on setting, focus on characters, because your setting will become really one of your characters in your book.
Absolutely. And I think it really brings your fiction to life. Going back to your legal mysteries, I think it might be too easy to say that your legal mysteries were written with an attorney as a protagonist because you've been an attorney. But I'm wondering, what was the inspiration for the real inspiration for the David Sloan series? Was it you being an attorney, and how does that differ from what you're writing about with Tracy Cross White?
Well, David Sloan actually worked in the building that I used to work in, and he actually worked in the same floor and in the same office that I worked in. So it was very real in that respect.
Okay.
In other respects, I mean, I was never as good a lawyer as David Sloan. Never. I mean, there are some people there that are really talented trial lawyers. So the inspiration for me came from a guy named James Brosnahan, who was an attorney at a law firm called Morrison Forrester in San Francisco.
It's a big one, yeah.
Yeah, a very big law firm, and he was a very, very talented lawyer. And he actually was hired to represent the kid who was caught fighting for the Taliban, 10, 12 years ago when we went to war over in Iraq. But the case that I had was, I was a law clerk there. I was probably 18, 19, 20 years old, and I was a law clerk while I was going to Stanford University. And they used to have these brown bag lunches where they would take us, and they would talk to us about what it's like to be a lawyer and different aspects of the law. And James Brosnahan happened to be in a trial, and he came into the room in his socks. He may have had sandals on, but he said, "There's my dog's barking." He said that he was in trial, and I said, "Well, do you think you won?" And he said, "You don't win trials in closing arguments. You win trials in opening arguments." And it was a really interesting comment. And he allowed us to go down and to watch him give his closing argument. And the man was absolutely brilliant. I mean, he was absolutely brilliant, and he's giving this incredible closing argument. And I can remember the jurors sitting in the jury box, nodding their heads, and like, yeah, they got it. And they knew what he was saying, and they knew it, and he won. He ended up winning. He was so persuasive that it was impossible. It seemed impossible for them to rule against him. So I came up with this idea for a lawyer. David Sloan was the lawyer who couldn't lose. He was that good. And it just kind of took off from there.
And it's wonderful. It's, definitely one of my favorite legal thrillers of all time. Tell us a little bit, because I know you're not only a great writer and a very successful career novelist, but you're also a great friend to the writing community. You and author Stephen James put together a novel writing intensive workshop up on Whidbey Island. And can you tell us a little bit about that program, what makes it special, and what kind of writer or level of writer should attend? I love to teach. It started sort of as a fluke, but because I was a lawyer, I was really anal about it, and so I created all these outlines and really kind of studied it and put together handouts for people that they could take with them. And I really enjoy it. It's you meet wonderful people, and it's people come to your classes because they want to be there. They want to learn. They're not there to challenge you. They're not there to be jackasses. I mean, it's really a collegial atmosphere, and I just really thoroughly enjoy it. So the novel writing intensive was a writing lesson started by, I'm going to close the door because my dogs are going crazy here. Hang on a second. Okay, no problem.
So Stephen started this writing intensive that takes place over 4 days, from Thursday to Sunday, and we take 10 to 12 students, no more than 10 or 12 students, and he was really overwhelmed the first couple of times he did it. We actually do it all over the country. We've done it on Whidbey. We've done it back in Tennessee. We've done it in Dallas. One other place is escaping me. And he was sort of overwhelmed. And he heard me teach at another seminar back at Thriller Fest in New York. And he approached me afterwards and said, I think you and I teach very similarly, although we're different. And I think you would fit in really well. Would you have any interest? And, like I said, I really thoroughly enjoy it. So I said, absolutely. As far as the level of writer goes, it really has varied. And we leave that up to, we don't exclude anyone. We leave that up to the writer. We have them send in 50 pages of the manuscript they're working on. And before we ever start the conference, we go through those manuscripts. And we provide comments, we provide feedback, we provide instruction right on the manuscript, editing, ways to make things shorter, move things faster along. And I would say that of the maybe 100 students that I've had, that there was only one who really wasn't ready. He really wasn't prepared to go forward. Now, there have been others that have been really, really good. I had one manuscript one time where, I called up Stephen after reading 50 pages and I said, I really don't know what more I could do to make this better. This thing is amazing. I mean, I don't write this well. And he said, let's get the rest of the manuscript and see if it holds together. And we did, and it did, and it was just a really strong story. And that person is now with a really high-powered agent. So, we get really a sort of a wide variety of students, and but we try to tailor the teaching, to everybody.
Great, good. And I know your website, which is robertdugoni.com, lists several other shorter workshops and seminars under the This Day We Write heading. Mm-hmm. What words of advice would you give to someone who's considering writing a book for the very first time, someone who's never attempted it before?
I'd say study the craft before you start. I was arrogant. I had written for the LA Times, and then I thought, how hard can it be to write a novel? Well, it's very hard to write a novel. But the good news is that it's a craft. I always tell my students, if somebody handed you a violin and said, go out on stage and play in front of 10,000 people, and you'd never played the violin before, you wouldn't do it. I mean,
right.
You
well,
wouldn't do
hopefully
it.
Not, yes.
Well, if somebody said, hey, we're going to perform a surgery in front of 50,000 people, go on out there and take that guy's gallbladder out, and you're not a doctor, well, you're not going to do it. So
right.
Why do you want to put yourself out in front of 50,000 people if you've never written a book before and don't know how to do it? And so I always tell people, study the craft, learn the craft, get the books that teach you the craft, get the books that teach you plotting, get the books that teach you characterization, get the books that teach you tension, get all those stuff, get stuff that talks about dialogue and setting, and learn it, study it, understand it, go to movies, watch movies, ask yourself, why is the character doing this? Why is the character saying this? What's going to happen next? Try to predict what's going to happen next. If you get it right, okay, you're starting to understand plotting. If you get it wrong, did it surprise you? Why did it surprise you? What might you have missed? Or was it just a really great twist? And why was it a great twist? And so that's my advice is, study the craft. It exists for a reason.
Great. I think that's sage advice. Bob, I wanted to ask what it's like for you as an established writer, a successful career novelist, to work with Thomas and Mercer. And are there key differences between now and what you experienced earlier in your career? I'm thinking that's a big yes.
Yeah, they are the best. I mean, I can't say it in any other way. They are the best. They have been the best for me. They are interested. They are committed. They are invested, and they are constantly selling books. How are we going to sell your book? What are we going to do next to sell your book? And they, My Sister's Grave, it came out in 2014, so it's been out for about 2.5, probably 3 years. And as of this morning, I think it was still the number 14 book of all books sold on Amazon. The Trapped Girl, which came out 2 weeks ago, was above it. But I mean, for a book that's been out for 3 years, well, the reason for that is they are constantly trying to find me more readers. So if I got a new book coming out, they are promoting the heck out of my backlist, reducing the price, get people to take a chance, read this writer you've never read before. And I think that for me has been the biggest difference, is they never stop promoting my books. I mean, 3 years and they're still promoting my Sister's Grave and the books that follow in that series. And the end result was we had a huge number of pre-sales for The Trapped Girl.
That sounds ideal. And they really allow you, it sounds like, to do what you do and love best. So that's worth so much.
Yeah, I mean, I asked them at a lunch one time, I said, can you guys teach me Facebook and Twitter? I mean, I have it, but I know I'm not very good at it. And, they looked at me and they said, we think the best thing that a writer can do is write the next book. and that's kind of their philosophy is you do what you do best and we'll do what we do best.
I love hearing that. And speaking of the trapped girl, would you treat us to a reading of an excerpt from your book, The Trapped Girl?
Yeah. I'm going to read, I'll tell you what, I'll read something very short. It's from the first chapter, and I'll set it up real quickly. So Kurt Schill is a high school junior who is poaching crabs out in Elliott Bay. And by poaching crabs, what I mean is that non-Indian tribes have a certain season that they can crab. So the Indian tribes can crab whenever they want, but everybody else is a certain season. Well, this kid is out at a time when he's not supposed to be, so it's very late or early in the morning. It's still very dark out, and he's going out to retrieve a crab pot that he dropped the night before. Okay. He'd become pretty good at estimating his haul from the weight of the pot. It wasn't foolproof. He brought up heavy pots only to find them filled with sunflower stars, flounders, and rockfish. This pot felt heavier than he'd ever pulled up before, and his shoulders soon began to burn. He had to tie off the rope to give his arms a break. Damn, he said, feeling that familiar flutter of anticipation in his stomach. He braced the soles of his rubber boots against the side of the hull, untied the rope, and immediately felt the weight of the cage. The boat listed, starboard side, the davit pole tipping down toward the water. Schill estimated he'd pulled in 60 feet of line, which still left about 20 feet to go. Something didn't seem right, though. The rope was not perpendicular to the water, but angled at 45 degrees, which usually indicated a snag. Whatever it was coming up first, his basket somewhere beneath it. That worried him. If he'd snagged a big bed of seaweed or lost a lost boat anchor, he had to cut it free, he could end up cutting the rope and losing his crab pot. Goodbye profit margins. He gave another pull, the muscles of his thighs, arms, and shoulders now burning. Sweat trickled down his forehead into his eyes, and he shook it away. Finally, a crab pot broke the water's surface. Though hard to see, it appeared rectangular. His pot was an octagon. Either his line had become entangled with the line of a pot set close by, or he'd snagged a rogue pot. He tied off the rope and carefully slid across the bench seat. The davit pole lowered another 6 inches. Reaching carefully for the rope, afraid he might tip the boat over, he grabbed it and dragged the pot close enough to reach the cage, holding it close. With his free hand, he retrieved a flashlight and directed the beam over the contents. The pot looked full, but with what? He saw seaweed and starfish, but also a few crabs scurrying about, feeding. Then he saw the hand.
Oh,
wow.
Oh. You've so turned up the tension on that scene, all the little technical details about the rope and snagging the pot, and oh, that's so good.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, now we're going to launch into a brief segment, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about layers. I know Wendy spoke earlier about layers, and I'm going to talk about the layers of a writer's path, some good and some frustrating. Several recent events have really caused me to think about, as Shakespeare would put it, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and how easy it is for writers to lose heart. Specifically, I'm focused on how writers put themselves out there every time they submit a book to an agent, enter a contest, or apply for a grant. Something I'm going through right now. Rejection is part of the price of admission if you're a writer. Skepticism is part of the price as well, as in, oh, you're writing a book. That's nice. Ultimately, it comes down to deciding if you want to be an author or if you want to be a writer. And some of us, like Bob, are talented, persistent, and fortunate enough to be both. I'm thinking of a column in Writer's Digest written by agent Barbara Poel of the Irene Goodman Agency, where she responded to a letter from a very discouraged writer. She said, "We need to remember that we do this because we love it. And when we're not doing it, we are cranky and mean and weird. and that writers are a motley, stumbling, keening, glorious, brilliant, achingly beautiful community like no other, and that sharing stories is part of our very humanity, and being part of the process of making that possible is humbling and awesome and quite simply the best thing ever. That's it. I think I'll paste that quote to my laptop so I can keep writing even on a bad day, because that's what writers do. They keep writing. Over to you, Wendy.
Wow, that is inspiring. Today, I'm going to confess, I am a sucker for characters. I just love analyzing characters and human nature. What decisions do they make? What drives them? What are their strengths, motivations, and weaknesses? What will trip them up? And what will they do to recover? The protagonist is central to my attention and has very high expectations to fulfill, because that character has to be someone I care about and am interested in enough or curious enough about to stick with them through a whole book. But it's no less important to me that an author successfully create memorable supporting characters. In mysteries, they're going to be there either to be a victim, to obstruct or to assist the detective or sleuth, or to tell the reader something about the protagonist or the setting. Yet these characters can't seem like they're just hanging around to fulfill this purpose. They need to appear as whole, independent people with personalities, motivations, and desires of their own. Sometimes the writer has to skillfully represent this in very few lines, or even just a few words. Just think about some of the supporting or minor characters that have captured your imagination or even your heart. I'll give you one example we may share of a supporting character who's recurring, Della Street, who was Perry Mason's secretary. We recently lost Barbara Hale, the actress who deftly played this strong character in the long-running Perry Mason TV show, which was based on the character written in the series of novels. Della appears first in the novel The Case of the Velvet Claws, and her introduction includes secretary. She was secretary, 27, quiet, fast as hell on her feet, had been places, knows all the lines, hard-boiled exterior, quietly efficient, puzzled over the lawyer, chestnut hair, trim figure, some lines on her face, a hint of weariness at the corners of her eyes. But what I found most revealing and entertaining were Della herself, her quotes. For example, Perry asks her for a 7-letter word for lawyer for his crossword puzzle, and she answers, shyster. Another example is when Perry receives a blank check for his services rendered, and Della says, "Do you want me to fill it in?" Or another example, she talks about, "He's a nice fellow. He has all the finer instincts of a scorpion." And another, Perry Mason says, "You've got him bound over, tried, and convicted. Are you giving up?" And Della says, "With you defending him, I know better." Just as memorable in this written series are other supporting characters, Paul Drake, Lieutenant Dragg, and the ever-hopeful losing district attorney, Hamilton Berger. How important are characters like these to the story? It's these supporting characters that form a hidden structure that gives a novel its authenticity. The reader believes in the world that the author creates because it's populated by believable characters. And I'm going to go on and give you my book recommendation, which this time it's in the Perry Mason 80 Books series by Earl Stanley Gardner. Gardner was an attorney who enjoyed litigation and the development of trial strategy, but was otherwise bored by legal practice. I'm recommending The Case of the Careless Kitten. This book is iconic Perry Mason with the usual twists and the surprise at the end, and I enjoyed it very much. The plot includes the money at stake in a will, a missing uncle, poisons, and the body of a mysterious stranger. What's most exciting is that during the investigation, Mason discovers the whereabouts of a vital witness and sends Della ahead to track him down. By the time the police's Trag and company show up, the man that they want is gone. So they decide to arrest Della for hiding a critical witness or possible murder suspect. How cool! It is great having Della on the hot seat. And they think they've got Perry cold this time, but Mason forces a speedy trial and proves Della's innocence with the help of the careless kitten. Oh, and incidentally figures out what really happened in the case of the missing uncle, what was behind the poisoning, and who really shot who. It's said that in this book, the author laments the loss of individual rights. Mason feels like the cards are stacked against the innocent victim in contemporary society. Gardner, the author, once said, "It's high time for citizens to wake up to the fact that it isn't a question of whether a man is guilty or innocent, but whether his guilt or innocence can be proved under a procedure which leaves in the citizen the legal rights to which he is entitled under a constitutional government." He felt strongly about this ideal and revisits it in many of the Mason books. Well, Bob, do you have a book recommendation for us?
For writers, I always recommend that they read The Green Mile by Stephen King. Whether you've seen the movie or not, I think if you read the book and really pay attention to the book, you can learn a great deal about the craft of writing, about using all of your senses, about having a heroic main character, about how you use sub-characters, secondary characters, how you bring them to life. That I just think it is one of his most brilliant pieces of writing, and I read it every single time I start a new book. I read The Green Mile. So I probably have read it, I would have to guess, 25 times. And it just never disappoints, and I always learn something when I'm reading it.
Interesting. I'm going to have to go out and find that now. Great. Well, I'm recommending a new TV series, at least new in the US, on the FX channel. And before I tell you what the name of it is, I'll just say it's the story of an estranged son who returns from living overseas, coming home because of the mysterious death of his father. In early episodes, he must battle an evil multinational corporation which seeks to buy him out of his inheritance, a strategically located piece of commercial real estate. There's no end to how far this organization will go to achieve their goal. Millions are on the line. Does this sound like a modern-day drama? You'd be wrong. It's a series called Taboo, set in 1814 Great Britain, starring Tom Hardy as anti-hero James Delaney. And the evil corporation? It's the British East India Company, which has their eye on the Nootka Strait off Vancouver Island, the gateway to trade with China. It features smoky, candlelit atmospheric scenes ranging from the slums and brothels of London to elegant manor houses, and then traces Delaney's backstory involving something to do with slave trading in Africa and the exploitation of Native Americans in British Columbia. It has a wealth of period detail and a very gothic, foreboding feeling to it, and I can't wait for another episode. It's a mature audience's rating, and deservedly so. This series is not intended for children as it features really bad language, graphic violence, nudity, and assorted depravity. Not my normal kind of thing, but it's very intriguing. So I'll keep watching. I'm about halfway through the 8 episodes, but for now, it's rather entertaining.
I'm watching it.
Are you?
I'm sold.
It's very, very compelling and
great shows lately, like The Crown and Victoria.
Victoria,
and
yes.
This sounds like another good one. I'm gonna check it out.
It's very, very, it kind of hooks you in, which is the purpose, I guess, of any compelling fiction. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Wendy, I hear rumors that next time out we'll be talking about a mystery weekend up on Whidbey Island in Washington.
Yeah, talk about sinking your teeth into a mystery. You can sink your whole self into it. This is one that's acted out in the town of Langley, and you are the sleuth. So we will actually be talking to the mystery woman who writes these scenarios that are then acted out by tourists and the town people.
Great. Well, Bob, I'd like to thank you so much for giving us the generous use of your time and sharing insights and comments with us today. We really appreciate it. And we'll hope to see you at the next Pacific Northwest Summer Conference in Seattle. And thank you again. I'm going to go out and find The Green Mile by Stephen King and definitely use that as a resource for my writing. And possibly consider coming up, maybe if you have another one of those workshops up on Whidbey Island, that sounds wonderful as well. Wendy, anything else to add?
Nope, nothing from me.
All right. Well, thanks
Thank
again.
you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being our guest. And we'll head on out with the more music from The Man in the Panama Hat and keep writing. Thanks again.